This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, Arya, and I are talking about bringing fresh eyes to your manuscript. We had a listener question from Elise. She wanted to know, what can you do going into revision to help you really get at your story, come at it fresh, other than sticking it in a virtual drawer? So, good question. Do you guys just rest your manuscripts when you're ready for revision? Is that your main tactic here?
I used to, because it's sort of one of those pieces of advice that's banded around. You need to get distance, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I think if you have the right tools, that's not the case. And by the right tools, I mean, things that you can use to get more analytical. Because I think that's probably the first step I do is I print it, and also I turn it into a Kindle version so I can read it on the iPad. And this is literally first draft. So I'll do a read, which is often painful because it's first draft, so it's pretty ugly. But what I'm trying to do is, at that point, I'm really ignoring sentence-based stuff. I want to know, does the story work? And in order to know that, I'm going to look at scenes to do the scenes work. Right. So I think that's probably my basic. That's where I'm first going to start, and it helps me to get away from my writing space, and that's why I'll do the old school thing of printing. Right. Printing is huge. It really makes a difference to look at your book as a book instead of as this screen of words that flows past you that you're typing and working on. It just creates a mind shift, which helps come at it with fresh eyes for sure. Yeah, and when I say tools, I mean, it depends what you want to, where you think your Achilles heel is, I think, as an author. It's easy to get locked into because words are detailed. It's easy to read a first draft and look at it and think, oh, I keep repeating that same stupid word. Well, that's fine. Make a note of it. It's going to come back in a polish. For now, what you want to do is get some global sense of where the action is rising and falling, or when I say action, you know what I mean. Right. Just where the story is rising and falling. Do the turns happen? Is the believability sustained? It depends what tool you're coming at it with. Where is my biggest issue? My biggest issue is probably that I jump too quickly sometimes in story flow, and so I think, oh, hang on a minute. What is the reader going to think here? All of a sudden, I missed an important scene. Right. Well, I think we need to break stuff down and unpack a lot of what we're talking about here. Well, ask Kathryn first as well. So it's not right. I was just about to do that. Kathryn, are you a fan of resting manuscripts? Is that your go-to method for gearing up for revision?
Not really.
Yeah.
I've done it. But what tends to happen when I rest things is that my brain continues to formulate brand new ideas. And then instead of revising my current story, I end up writing a brand new one, which is not what you want to do at that point. Well, there shouldn't be a king. Right. There shouldn't be a king. You should be a wizard that shifts into a dragon. That's right. Right, exactly.
Yeah. I think that, as you were saying initially, Robert, that advice gets bandied about so much that it can seem like the right thing to do in all situations. But really, it's a useful tool when your manuscript has gotten so stale for you that you can't stand to look at it anymore. That's when I tell writers, give it a break, walk away from it. Yep. Because, if you're looking at burnout, that's the time to rest the manuscript. But if you're still motivated to work with it, there's no reason why you can't finish one draft. Celebrate and then turn it around and go right into revision. I think to answer Elise's question here and really benefit people, we should take these tools kind of individually, one at a time here. So let's see. You were talking about ups and downs, rises and falls in your story, Robert, right?
Yeah.
So do you have a tool specifically to help you identify that issue or an approach?
Yeah, various. I used to, my first book, I used Ros Morris's beat sheet method, and I would still use some form of that, which is to separate out all the scenes, and then I would give each scene a code for how much tension is there, is there a conflict, what's the emotion, is it positive or negative emotion. So it would be great for the scene, but it wouldn't necessarily give me anything for the whole story. And then you're going to laugh at this. I would then take that and I would graph it. And so I'd look at scene by scene, maybe 60, could be 90 scenes.
Right.
And then I would have a plot line that would be showing, from the protagonist's point of view anyway, where the rising and falling emotion would be, whether it's positive or negative, and where the tension was. And that gave me a really quick glimpse at where the top sort of 6 problem scenes were. And then the other one that I always used, and I still do, which comes from, I think it's that one we've referenced before with the, okay, I'll have to think about it. We have referenced it, so I'll think about it while everyone else is talking.
Okay.
Stuart, somebody. The book architect method or something like that. And one of the things he says is write down all the scenes you think are bleh, because they're just sitting in your head and you go, oh, it's awful, I hate that one, after you've read it. And then write down all the ones, without looking at it, write down all the ones that's stuck in your head that you think, oh, that's fantastic. It might not be fantastic, but, and so I would give those a green or a red highlight on my list of scenes so that I need to then go back and fix the ones I thought were weak and then review the ones I thought were fantastic because they might not be. So that gave me a first pass.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the rising and falling action, there are really 2 different things you've just talked about. The first one is rising stakes and tension with the plot. Is it consistently going up? If we put it on Freytag's pyramid and graph it, which I do, I recommend everyone do. It's brilliant. I would never laugh at that because that visual representation of your story arc is just so useful for us. So that will give you a sense of the stakes and tension consistently rising through the story. The other thing with the red and green highlight is quality. Which scenes are memorable? Which scenes are coming off the page? And which ones are falling flat? So not sticking in your mind, not moving you, not pulling you forward as a reader through the story. So those are 2 great tools that you could use, I would say, in separate passes. One to look at your plot arc and the other one to look at the quality of the writing. And is each scene or each chapter really compelling the reader forward through the story?
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about that is you've got a 60-scene novel. I guarantee I could probably write 30. I could name 30 of them. So you think, okay, there are 15 or 10 that I love, 20 that I hate and I want to rewrite, but what the hell are the other 30?
Right. Yes, the ones that you just can't put a name to.
I can't even remember.
Right.
So I've got 30 completely unmemorable scenes in my book.
Yeah. Kathryn, do you have a specific issue you'd like to tackle when you revise, or a specific technique you like to use?
I'm still working on my techniques, but one that I'm finding useful is doing that back outlining or re-outlining after. So doing that, like Robert was saying, or like you were saying, graphing it, taking a look at what scenes are where, and then being able to look at it from a bird's eye view again. Right. Because you bird's eyed and then you went into detail, and then now to go back out, just kind of in and out, gives you a really good sense of what's going on actually versus what you had originally intended.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another useful technique is to read your manuscript with one specific issue in mind at a time. So it might be character development. Is my character on the page who I think my character is in my head? Or it might be dialogue. Is the dialogue snappy and interesting and moving the story? Or are my characters just like you know, talking to each other without helping the story or, you know, setting. Am I creating mood? Is my world present on the page? So whatever issue you want to look at, don't try to look at everything at once. Like, here's a chapter, go. I've got to now look for 10 different issues. Pick one issue, do the whole book. Read it with the highlighter. You know, where is it succeeding? Where is it failing? I annotate my manuscripts. I write notes in the margins. You know, fix this scene. The scene needs more narrative exposition, or this dialogue is really lame. Come up with something
you have
better.
To do that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The other thing as well that is really helpful, and this might not be necessarily that very first broad pass, but when you're on this, say, second and third, when you're coming through with a very specific reason, that's where I found Scrivener to be an extremely helpful technical tool, software-wise, because particularly if you've got multiple POV, I tag the scenes according to, you know, whether it's a person's particular POV or if it's a particular setting or if it's a particular part of the theme, also if they're plot points. So then I can group them all together, because Scrivener will just let you say, okay, show me only the scenes with Andrew's point of view, or show me only the scenes with, you know, with where Jean is the center of the conflict, because I've tagged them previously that way. So it's a bit of work to set it up, but then you can show, let's say there are only 10 scenes where, you know, Jean is the center of the conflict. You can read all those at once.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like ripping them out of your print copy and then seeing them all on the screen. And that I love that for continuity and again, rising stakes and, you know, not repeating the same conflict.
Right. I find that's incredibly useful. You know, my current book does have multiple POVs, but I really think of it as a single POV primarily, but there are different themes. So I set up keywords for each theme. I do actually have color coding for the different POVs, so I can see where those sort of secondary POVs are being interspersed. Am I clumping them together? Is Jess getting enough time before I, you know, insert one of those secondary POVs? And then with the theme keywords, not only can I chunk them out and read for continuity, but I can look and say, is this theme being addressed through the whole manuscript, or is it only being addressed in part 1 and part 6? You know, kind of, did I drop it for a while and then pick it up again, as opposed to keeping it present? Because if your character is dealing with something like a relationship issue that is a subplot to your main plot, your character is going to have that relationship issue for the duration of your book. So you've got to make sure that thematic content is present in every chapter, you know, more or less, not dropping out for Act 2 or something.
Right.
Yeah, or that's right. So you might have, you know, in the beginning of the story, these two characters keep butting heads, and then in the latter half of the story, they're present together in several scenes, but they never spar.
Right.
You know, think, I've missed something there, and that it's hard to see that sometimes, even when you're doing you read of your first draft. So we're talking multiple levels here, aren't we? We're sort of, from the question is, you know, what do you do first? Because that advice, not originates, but it's certainly been popularized by Stephen King, because in his book he said, once you've done your first draft, stick it in a drawer for 6 months. But that's the old school. You know, he publishes a book a year as traditional publishing. He's the Grand Master. It's his process. And I think your advice, Alida, which is, you know, if you're feeling stale from it, then definitely get some space. But you might be really excited to have finished it. I can't wait to polish this up. In which case, my first step would be to do exactly what Kathryn did, which is kind of that reverse outline. Okay, well, what scenes did I end up with, and what do I want to evaluate them with to start with? And as you know, I'm a story grid student as well. So I think some of the story grid tools are really, really helpful here, because you do get Sean Coyne talks about value shifts in each scene, and your value shift, in particular in the key scenes, should be related to your overall theme and the story's main conflict. So, you know, there's no point in having a major plot turning point turning point. It's early in the morning.
Right.
Based around, say, I'm gonna think about this. A car crash and something, causing an injury, if it doesn't necessarily relate to or cause more issues with the overall story's conflict, it could, but obviously those are the sort of things you look for as red alerts. So I do think it's very tool based. It depends on where you want to come from, but I would definitely be starting with ripping out all the scenes.
Right. Well, and I think to go back to Elise's question of how do you come at it with fresh eyes,
yes,
I don't think
point.
there is an answer to that. If you need to really come at it with fresh eyes, you're probably burned out, so stick it in a drawer. But otherwise, the thing to do is pick an issue, pick a tool, and then take a pass through it, see what comes of that. Make revisions, fix things, and get excited as new ideas are generated through those revisions, because until you get to the polishing stage, you may still be generating new ideas and having great ideas.
Yep.
And certainly between the first draft and the second or even the third, I would expect you to be doing drastic changes to a manuscript. Just because we have so many new insights as a result of working with something on the page, as opposed to just getting it out of our heads.
Well, and I think you guys were talking about like chunking it up differently, not having it be linear. And I think that would do a lot for giving you fresh eyes, because you're reading it in a different fashion than it was intended to be. So like, depending on what sort of pass you're going for, how big of an issue you're looking at, chunking it into those, out of order sequences, but still thematically relevant or character relevant or point of view relevant, is going to change the way that you see it and look at it. Right. And then the other thing I was thinking, the next, like another tool that we haven't talked a lot about, was Robert had mentioned sticking it in Kindle or printing it out, or like you could listen to it. That is going to change your perspective on the book as well. And like, I listen to audiobooks and then I'll read books, and I miss so much when I'm reading versus when I'm listening. You have to hear every word. So I think just changing the format that you're looking at it in can do a lot for freshening your outlook or your eyes, or catching things that you didn't see before, just because you don't skip over it the same way you would if it was exactly the same as you wrote it. Yeah,
that's a really interesting point. I don't like listening to things a computer reads because they misemphasize syllables and words and such.
I would read it out loud, though.
Yeah, I do that.
I used to read all my stuff out loud as for one of my passes. I haven't done it recently, but it always caught stuff that I didn't expect.
Right. Yeah.
I think that this is going to change pretty soon, though. I don't know if you've heard some of that latest Google AI stuff. They've got some samples of a person reading it out, and presumably the same person's voice that's been sampled, and then Google's AI reading it out. You can't tell the difference. I've played the two to people, and they've picked the wrong one as the real human.
Really?
So that obviously they're still very contextualized. So within the context of a novel and a character's arc, that's going to be another AI challenge again.
Right.
But I use an app called Voice Dream on the iOS, and that's surprisingly good. I mean, yes, you do miss the emphasis, but it's good enough. And I don't use it in first draft, but when I'm getting close to the end, I always use that. And I must admit, I'm going at something like probably 2.5 times normal speed, because that just helps you not fall asleep, and catches a lot of really good repetition. Bad repetition, depending on your point of view.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a tool to use when you're getting closer to the polishing draft, when you're really listening for things like syntax, word choice, repetition. That's huge for all of us, because it's like once you use a certain word, it'll turn up 3 or 4 times in half a page. It's kind of becomes a go-to word. I like to read out loud when I feel uncertain about a scene. Mostly I can just read to myself, but if something just isn't quite clicking and I'm not putting my finger on it, or I think my sentence is close, but I'm not positive about the rhythm or, if it's going to be clunky. Reading it aloud is huge. So if you can, listen like Robert to an AI at 2.5 times the speed, go for it. I think I couldn't do that personally. I think it would, I don't know, it might lull me into complacency more than reading the words on the page, actually. Yeah, it's interesting though, but definitely a great tool for polishing.
Yeah, it actually, maybe I should be a bit clearer as well. You see it visually on the screen, so I put it on the iPad, and it has a little yellow highlighter that goes across the words that are that it's reading out at the same time. So it's kind of a dual tool, if you like. And it's quite interesting because you pick up things like or you'll find, and it's great for if you're having your book narrated for sentences that just don't sound right because you've used a combination of words that look good on paper, but as soon as you try to say them together, they're too tricky.
Yeah. Interesting. Huh. Well, that's definitely worth checking out then. I might have to give that one a try.
Yeah, it's a paid app, but I've had no regrets. And you can buy extra voices. I think the paid version now, the basic iOS voices are all good enough. When I bought it, they were not quite, and I wanted a UK and an American one. But now you can get Australian voices if you want them as well, cool. It's amazing.
That is neat. Well, are there any final recommendations, final tools or approaches, something we haven't covered yet?
Well, fresh eyes, you could always get somebody else's fresh eyes on it, give them a section.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, it obviously has to be a trusted partner or, somebody whose advice you value.
Right, and depending on which draft you're in, that may or may not work so well. And, you might be looking more at a critique group than we're really, I think, talking pre-beta reader revision here. Yeah, but definitely critique groups help. Other people's insights are huge. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.